So, are we live? Is it going? Can everybody tell me if it's live? Can you even hear me? Oh, it's much easier when Wendell does this. Anyway, thanks everyone for staying up so late. It's half past midnight here in the UK, and I thought I should just put together a little Q&A video for you guys because you are the subscribers. We finally hit that 10k goal. I honestly had no idea where this channel TechTechPotato would be going. So it's great that you've come, stayed, hung out, watched a few of my videos, told me where to go, take a long jump off a short pier. It's all been fun. I never realized how difficult video editing was and how scripts are and just how different it all is from doing written content. So I've got to give kudos to the big guys and the small guys in this space. Video is difficult. It's difficult. You can't correct yourself after the fact when you've made the video. Making edits is so difficult, but it's been fun. I've got lots of scripts to go through through the rest of the year, touching on really fun topics. If you want some behind the scenes of how the press industry works, I've got a few of those as well. So it's going to be fun. But today is just a very simple Q&A. I reached out on Twitter earlier today when we hit the 10k goal. I didn't actually catch the moment 10,000, but 10,001 is kind of awesome, and I can see lots of people in the chat speaking. Hi everyone, how's it going? Hope you've all got your drinks. I've got mine in my Global Foundries mug. It's only water though. Oh, yeah, it's still got more work to do. So I'm going to take the first question from the chat from Winkit Lee. How do you split the time between TechTechPotato and an Antec? So I'm sure most of you know my main job is actually senior CPU editor at an Antec. I've been doing that now for 10 years. I started doing the first 5 or so. I was senior motherboard editor, which is now the domain of Gavin Bonshaw, who's also in the chat. Hi, Gavin. But for the last 5 years, I've been taking over all the CPU stuff. I also help manage the staff, write some of the news, do a lot of the editing. It's really fun, but that's my day job. That's what pays the bills. Antec doesn't really have sort of a strategy on video, and I kind of wanted to do my own thing, and that's doing something like TechTechPotato, seeing guys like Linus and Austin and a few of the others have success in video. I was thinking, well, what can I bring to the space that perhaps they don't? So interesting, back and forth in my mind for a few years about how exactly to do it, and then actually getting off my rump and getting to the point where I'm actually creating video content. So TechTechPotato is a personal project. It's absolutely nothing to do with an Antec. They're not in control of anything. I get to decide what I do. I cover the bits of the industry that I want to cover that may not necessarily be very specific to an Antec. And then, I also talk a little bit about F1 and everything like that. How I split my time is basically I have a day job, and this is my evening job, and the idea is ne'er the twain shall meet. But because both are in the tech space, obviously, there's some overlap. I get to do some fun things because I am the senior editor for an Antec, which do spill over into my channel, talking about fun things. And if you saw the video with Magnetar, Amari Magnetar system with the overclocked 643990X, that's obviously an Antec first article. The only agreement I have with Ryan is that I give an Antec first crack if I ever get interesting stuff to talk about, which is perfectly fair. Like I say, they're the ones that pay my bills. This is just a fun side project, and the idea is that if it grows, then I'll reinvest and I'll buy stupid things. I literally have here one of the 3 Carrizo APUs that came to desktop. This came in the mail yesterday. Hopefully I get it out of the box. this year, next year, maybe. Ooh, so some people are asking, am I going to do a video on AMD's financials? That's the idea. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. Mike Spencer, if YouTube takes off, is there a threshold when you'll switch to doing YouTube full time? I haven't thought that far ahead. I'm just taking it one day as it comes. I really, really do love my job at Anantech. For a journalist, I'm nicely paid. I get to travel in a normal year. I'd travel about 200,000 miles a year. And doing written content kind of enables you to do that a bit more than perhaps doing video if you're always attached to video editing software. I haven't even considered outsourcing video software, video editing to somebody else yet. I'm just doing what I love for the time being. And hi everyone. Let's take a Formula One question. What do you think of the F1 season so far? As a Red Bull Honda fan, it's been a roller coaster. Also, what do you think Red Bull should do about the power units? I think Red Bull should go down the Mugen route. F1 season is fun, as much as I am a Brit. Lewis Hamilton winning all the time. Yeah, I'd like to mix it up. Gasly winning was great. I'm actually a big Albon fan, so I really wish him to do well. Russell, Lando, if those three were fighting out for the title, it would be amazing in different teams as well. And yes, I do think Red Bull should go down the Honda route, failing that Ferrari. Thank you, Mark Rose, for your $5, 5 Canadian. Is that I'm so new to this chat. Super chats are still. Ooh, what variety of potato is your minimum specification? Russet. Perhaps this is where should I don't actually know that much about potatoes. As long as it's not growing, and I can boil them, mash them, sticking them in a stew, it's great. I do like my mashed potatoes. I do like my fries, chips. Because in the UK we call them chips, and crisps. Actually, personally, what I prefer is big potatoes because you're peeling fewer of them. Or if you're just cutting them up and ovening them, that's nice. Don't go for the absolute cheapest potatoes, but there's no need to go for the expensive ones. Roast potatoes that you get at Christmas. People might hate me for this, but I'm not a big fan of the super crispy ones. I'm not a fan of the very uncrispy ones either. I like it a nice mix. It just can't be too crispy, otherwise it gets off. Are one of my cats going to make an appearance today? Probably not. I think they're both asleep. I have a PhD. Yes, I have a PhD. I did computational chemistry at Oxford. Do I miss academia? Yes. I came out of doing my PhD with so many ideas for research projects, for papers that I thought would be really, really interesting. But it turns out I was the only one interested in them. So nobody was willing. I even applied for a second PhD because the job hunt wasn't going that well. During that time, I was doing freelance work for Anantech, so I thought after 6 months of not finding a job, I just decided to pick it up and run with it, work for Anand 45, 50 hours a week. And eventually that's just morphed into a full-time journalism career. Nope, didn't think I'd be here 10 years ago. Oh geez, I finished my PhD about 10 years ago now. That's crazy to think. So I'm going to move over to some of the Twitter questions. So yeah, again, thank you to everyone who's a subscriber. You guys are great. Let me know what sort of content you're interested in. I've got a few interesting things coming up, like I said. I still need to do a video on this. This is a Intel make your own lake field with Lego. I've bought an overhead thing for a camera so I can just build it together. That's going to be fun. I've had this now for a month and I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. Um, and now then we can see how Foveros works and things like that. So I've read a few of these questions already, but I'm just going to go through down. And sorry if I ignore chat a second. I'm going back and forth. Congratulations on your recent video on Intel Financial Day. Thank you. Intel Financial Day video. I think I actually jumped into the presentation about halfway through because I forgot it was on. And just went straight into the documents. And that was actually a really fun video to make. I didn't expect it to be 50 minutes. If you love the 50-minute videos, let me know. I did put out a couple of shorter 7 and 17-minute clips, I think. I think for those sorts of videos, having those little clips is a good way to go, just if you want a bite-sized piece of the information. But yeah, that video is actually quite fun. And then AMD's financials are soon, so... Are you going to try for a video on Intel Capital anytime soon? Love the cat. So Intel Capital is the investment arm of Intel. Imagine it's a separate company with a bunch of money that it can invest in companies that may or may not help Intel. That's kind of what it is. It's a play primarily to get a return on investment, but also if companies are well versed within the Intel ecosystem, they'll buy Intel products or maybe even merge with Intel. Merging happens less frequently, but I went to the Intel Capital event last year in Phoenix on my way to a more important event, so my mind kind of wasn't on the game. But if they do another event in person, yeah, I really want to go. I mean, it's limited press. I think there was 4 press last time that went, so I would love to do some more content around what Intel Capital is. I think general public will be interested in hearing about this arm of Intel that's just an investment arm, and then for the financial guys, it'll be hopefully give them more idea of what goes on behind the scenes at Intel. So yeah, best place for an Intel Capital investor summit would be, yeah, best article would be a video when I'm going. So Matthew Konatsa, the Tom's Hardware, ex-Tom's Hardware, now Adored TV guy. What's your minimum specification? So I've actually thought about this. This isn't a joke. As a journalist, the most critical time in my day is when I'm flicking between tabs doing research. You know, the whole trope about having 50 tabs open with doing lots of research and pinning things together. If the system can't adjust windows properly, then it's no good. So something that has at least 4 cores, that being said, does my laptop have 4 cores, 8550U? That's what I've been using recently anyway, before lockdown. Good single thread turbo speed. So even though Intel, you know, we talk about 50 watts turbo and stuff, if that gives me the speed I want, yeah, I'm fine with that. 16 gigs of memory, it's almost criminal that laptops are shipped with less than 16 these days. Resolution needs to be about 1080. Battery life, as I said, because I'm one of these people that tends to fly everywhere, sometimes I get in most of the time I'm in an economy seat. Almost exclusively I'm in an economy seat. And half the time I'm in that economy seat, there isn't a plug socket. So if I can get 10, 12, 15 hours battery life in a device, then yeah, I'm good to go. I've got a Huawei MateBook X Pro with I think it's got an MX150 inside. I have been known to take that on a plane with a Xbox controller and play Sonic the Hedgehog. I get 3 hours battery life when that happens. And it's fun watching people watch me play Sonic the Hedgehog on an airplane. Simon, will AMD ever make newer APUs available to mortals? So specifically the 4000 series, I doubt it. At this point, I doubt it. I mean, we're waiting for Zen 3, the CPUs to come, and then the APUs are usually, you know, months and months after. You've got to wonder what AMD are going to do for this on Zen 3 below $300. and the current prices of the 4000 series APUs kind of don't fit in with that because they're OEM models. I mean, I have all three of the Ryzen 7, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 3, Ryzen 4000 APUs. I have tested them. I haven't got around to writing the review. I'm about 3 weeks behind in my review writing. Apologies to that. Let's go back to chat. Will you crash the WAN show after this stream? Oh yeah, they do it on a Friday night, don't they? Would you consider a TechTechPotato podcast? So I used to run the AnandTech podcast. Audio editing, like video editing, at the time just bore the pants off me because I'd be removing every I'm not an audio engineer, so I kind of know some tricks, but I don't know the main tricks. So yeah, and then having a regular weekly podcast, sometimes I feel that there are some weeks where it's not worth talking about. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand that the idea of something like a podcast is interaction with the presenter and the viewer, perhaps as much as it is about the content. My worry is that when there's little content that I want to talk about, or when, because I have this AnandTech full daytime job, I'd much rather be spending time doing that. Or if I am going to do a podcast, I think Ryan Smith, editor-in-chief of AnandTech, would prefer I did an AnandTech podcast first before I did a TechTechPotato podcast. That would be interesting. If I was going to do both in every week or every other week, I would definitely need a number two, and I think somebody like John Masters would be excellent for that, if you're watching, John. Any story on the golden Nvidia shroud behind you? Hang on, let me bring back the normal screen. You're referring to this. I plan to have a video on this. A few people know what it is. It's a very fun thing. Oh, let's see. I was surprised to find out that Anand is a North Carolina local. Yes. He used to live in North Carolina. He obviously works for Apple now, so he's in the Bay Area. But I still get emails to my AnandTech email about North Carolina water supply press releases. For some reason, they think it's worth sending it to AnandTech because AnandTech was listed as a North Carolina business. Content, more workstation content. That's good to know. Workstations are weird. I mean, system reviews in itself are quite odd because you're essentially reviewing the motherboard, the CPU, the chassis, the cooling, the thermals, noise, the power supply, the memory, the SSD, all in one. And if what I've seen online of people interested in those sort of system reviews, compared to just a straightforward CPU review or a straightforward GPU review, the traffic is way lower. I mean, if there's something really interesting like the Amari Magnetar system, then yeah, great, because that is overclocked like crazy and it's extreme and you just don't expect to see it. I also once reviewed a ThinkStation 900 from Lenovo. That one was really good because it was a dual processor system and they had designed that chassis so beautifully for hot swap, for cooling on the baffles. It almost didn't matter what the performance was when I reviewed that because I thought the design of the chassis was so amazing. So if there's something that comes to market that's interesting like that and I have a space in my schedule for it, then yeah, I guess I don't see why not. What happened to Samsung's Optane competitor? That's Mutation 666. That was Znand, and that was just meant to be sort of like a super fast NAND that wasn't Optane. They still sell that. It's an enterprise product. It was never designed for consumers. Don't ever expect it to come to consumers like that. Let's see. Love the long form video. Thank you, Jure. Thank you, Mutation. Thank you, Animation Creations. Buster HP. Scoops Pro. Thank you, Dave. Is Lisa Su nice in person? Yes, she has to be with the press, because if she wasn't, that would be a story. But so I've interviewed Lisa 3, 4, 5 times now. Yeah, some one-on-one, some group session. Lisa's an interesting individual because if you've followed my interviews over the years, Mark Paper Master 1 that I put on the channel, and then I've got years and years on Anantech. You may notice I ask long-winded questions. It's an interviewer technique because when you ask a question, I assume what the obvious PR answer is going to be, and then I preface the question by saying, given that the typical answer, or given that, and then essentially answer my own question, then ask the question in a way that means that they have to think in a different way. That's kind of my interviewing technique. That's sometimes why the questions are longer than the answers. Lisa is great at answering those sorts of questions because she kind of sees through my crap. There's no great way of putting that. I use that as an interviewer technique to try and get the most out of who I'm interviewing. Getting them to put a different sort of non-PR spin on what they're talking about. Some people don't like it. Some people think it just results in more PR talk. But Lisa's really good. She understands what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to get at. And like Mark, there's always a few, grains there of honesty, passion, knowledge that you might not get with other. I get offered interviews all the time with random CEOs, and I don't take up most of the offers basically, but with Lisa and Mark, I never interviewed Jim Anderson properly. He now works for Lattice Semiconductor. Lisa Spellman of Intel is actually another good one to that. I've interviewed her a couple of times, and finding the right questions to ask Lisa Spellman is always fun, because you can tell how happy she is and how knowledgeable she is about the product, and that's always a great person to interview. Somebody who does something like that. Yeah. People might leave to go to see Linus. Yeah. Would I connect with Linus live? I'm having almost somewhat trouble trying to keep all this together, so let's see. Windows or Linux? Windows, just because my benchmark automation tools are all in Windows. I have a rough knowledge of Linux, and I'm always constantly afraid that I'll need a 300 character command to get something to work, and one thing would be mistyped, and I will have to completely scrap that OS image. That's my worry on Linux. I'm more than happy for Wendell to do that stuff. He's great. I knock on his door as much as I can. Is there any actual information why the NV3000 series are so delayed? No, not really. Even though my research stuff was in GPUs, I would happily write about GPUs, but because I write about CPUs, I follow the CPU side more. Let's see, Renoir has a ridiculous IMC, kinda. Is it finally time to upgrade my i7 816 Nehalem? If you can afford it, probably. Monthly podcast talking about some of your post-PhD ideas. So one of my video ideas is that I actually found my PhD Viva presentation. So when you do a PhD, at the end of your PhD, you do a thesis. I'll show it on stream sometime. It's in my front room. And in order to be awarded your PhD, you have to do a defense, which is typically you plus plus one researcher of the institution that you're in, and another researcher of a different institution but in the same field. And they read through your thesis in advance, and they ask you questions. My thesis defense was comparatively easy, and I don't say that lightly. Basically, they didn't understand it and asked me to do a presentation on it. So I spent 2 hours doing a presentation on it, 120 slides. They still didn't understand it, gave me 3 really easy questions, and then said, congratulations. So I do have that presentation, and one day I will go through it for you on the channel, but it will take 2 hours. So strap in, and there will be timestamps. Is there what's the preferred way for a TechTechPotato subscriber to address you? Dr. Cutress, Mr. Cutress, Ian. Ian's fine. A lot of people sometimes get annoyed because they see the doctor a bit everywhere. So there is a story behind this. This is probably a good time to say it, but I'll do it in a separate video as well. I didn't use my I achieved my PhD almost 10 years ago now, and I didn't. The only place I ever used it was on my business cards, that you hand out. And it's funny how effective having that doctor on your name on a business card in Asia really is, because suddenly you become the most important person in the room if you're dealing with marketing people, because they understand that you've got that academic background, whether it's relevant or not. So I didn't use it I didn't use it on Nantech. I didn't use it anywhere until middle of last year, where a few key people from the industry, peers, analysts I respect, senior executives that I get on well with, all people who I would promote as good people in the industry, that have their heads set on straight, all suggested that I should use it as a differentiating factor to other journalists. So, I mean, in terms of, say, if I go to a company like Intel or AMD, tons of PhDs, tons of very, very talented researchers. They're all much smarter than I am, and I bow down to them because they all create some good stuff. But in the terms of the journalist world, it is a differentiating factor. I wouldn't say it gets me anywhere. I mean, it with people say, oh, but he's a doctor, but then that's an appeal to authority, and whatever my name is, I think my analysis and my work do the talking, and it's not just a couple of letters at the beginning of my name. And don't get me wrong, I'm proud of it. It was the right direction to go in my career, I think. So do a level 1 podcast, take Chris to sport 1 week. So Wendell has given me an open invitation that when I go over to the US and I go through Kentucky, and I know he's near an airport somewhere, that if I get on the right set of flights, I can spend a couple of days over there and we'll go through and make some content. It just has to sync up with both his and my schedules, and back when obviously we're not in lockdown. So that's on the cards. Whether it's something, actually just place in video, we'll see. Which is the best gaming keyboard and mouse brand best for you? So my mouse is an MSI freebie that I got at a press event about 6 years ago. Before that, it was a Roccat Cone, which was an X-Review sample. And then my keyboard is, if you can see this, is a very old Rosewill MX Blues that I got in 2012. Don't ask me about that sort of gaming hardware. The best thing I ever had was a Logitech G15 wireless mouse. That was before wireless mice actually lasted more than 3 hours. And I wish that still worked. I do have it here. Do you have suggestions on ECC RAM for an AMD build? So I did do a big diatribe on Reddit once about ECC on AMD. I will take that and perhaps do it in a separate video, because that's going to require more than a few minutes of explanation. Short answer is, don't assume ECC works on AMD unless you've got an EPIC. Animation Creations 42, whereabouts in the UK are you from? Your accent puzzles me and seems to keep changing. Yes, if you are from any of the areas that I have lived, you can perhaps pick out bits of my accent. So technically, I lived in Bedfordshire for the first few years of my life. Then I moved to Southend in Essex. That was a bad Southend accent. Southend. And a lot of my mother's side of the family are still in Southend, including all my brothers and sisters. I lived there and for about 8, 9, 10 years. Then I moved to Cambridgeshire for 6 years. Then I was in up north in Hull, which is Yorkshire, but it's not a proper Yorkshire accent. It's Hull. It's the accent. The key phrase I use to bring out the whole accent is "Oh no, lost my baby down Holderness Road. Burns are loose." It's that sort of accent. So I do have a bit of Hull in there, and I've claimed to live in the north for 4 years. That's where I did my undergraduate in Hull. They have a great chemistry department. I'm sure you can see periodic table of elements T-shirt here. I picked this up in Philadelphia, Chicago Airport, purely because it has all the elements down at the bottom. I'm not sure if you can see all the new ones that they named recently. This is a fantastic T-shirt. It's a shame the neck isn't proper tight, but so undergraduate in Hull, then postgraduate in Oxford for 3.5 years, and then London for the last 10. So all the different little bits of accent. I'm one of these people where my accent will change based on where I am. So I once spent a week in Dudley, and by the third day I was speaking in a Dudley accent. It's one of those things that diplomats, I guess, learn how to do, because you try and sort of blend in with the people around you, and if they're talking a certain way, you just pick up the idiosyncrasies, so it's more common to them. And then eventually, some of that gets melded into your personal character. So, yeah, whereabouts are you from? I don't claim to have a hometown just because I've lived elsewhere, but I have been in London for the last 10 years. So, Harry Abanto, question. Are the Intel security bugs finally catching up to them? Is AMD winning in data center? So, Intel experienced record Xeon sales, partly due to the fact that the security bugs initiated some performance deficit up to 10-30%, depending on what hardware you had and what you're using it with. So the best way to add 10-30% is just to buy 10-30% more CPUs. I mean, that's one avenue of the cloud growth. The other element of cloud growth is the fact that it's cloud. I think COVID has put a dampener on AMD's growth, just because in data center, just because as it came time for certain people to be upgrading in that sort of 3-5 year cycle, they had the choice of going with AMD, still x86, but a new platform that may need to be optimized, but we're currently in a lockdown situation and support may be difficult, versus let's just go ahead, buy Intel. Performance may not be the best, but our software is already optimized for it. We know what it is, and we know what support we get. And Intel is 10 times the size of AMD. So that probably put a little bit of brakes on AMD's data center growth. So, Stephen Hart, I love Rick Astley more than you. Don't we all? Let's go back to some of the Twitter questions. Stephen, how many wafers should you eat as part of a balanced diet? Do wafer process nodes affect nutritional content or flavor? So funny story time. CES this year? Yes, this year, because it was when I was running around with a Tiger Lake wafer. I said to some of the Intel comms people as a joke, what you need to do is you need to hire me to create a best wines guide for process nodes, where I would do we create like a small 8-page booklet talking about Intel's process nodes, some of the improvements, but then I would also describe the wafers in the same way that a wine snob would explain wafers, and I'd suggest like a food pairing. Yeah, that idea that was laughed at the time. I was kind of half serious. I don't think they took me seriously. Maybe that's something I should do on my own accord. Alex, hi Alex. I know you've been in the chat. I think you still are. How many wafers did you eat this week? Yes, I don't get my hands on wafers that often. I mean, the first time I did that funny, haha, let's take a bite of it, was an Intel event in Oregon where they just had was it a 10 nanometer wafer, just an isolate wafer, just there outside of its case, and they were letting us hold it. And I just thought, this is be funny. Actually, I have to kind of half credit Gavin with this. I hope you don't mind me telling this story, Gavin. But so Gavin, my motherboard editor at Anantech, when he ran his own YouTube channel, he did a review of a Samsung SSD, I can't remember if it was an M.2 or a 2.5 inch. But he did a joke, how does it taste? I think this was at the same time when the Nintendo cartridges were going about with their, they have a slight taste to stop people eating them. Apparently, I heard that the PR team weren't too happy that, or were confused why Gavin did that. Now, I've done a joke thing since I was very young for Christmas, where I kind of, instead of like shake the presents, I'd try and take a bite out of them. And then, it kind of came to this thing, and I had the idea with the TechTechPotato, and Soft Fox Lad. Every sub was deserved. Thank you. Or, thank you to all the subscribers. I can't say it enough. Where do you see yourself taking the channel as it grows more? I have no clue. I have a document, which is basically my ideas list, and I have several unfinished scripts, and I have plenty of ideas, like I said, with the Lakefield stuff, and in my mind is a combination of what I want to do and what I want to do to grow the channel, and I just want to see where it takes me. I kind of don't want to think beyond, the next engagement. I've not even looked into advertising the channel. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've monetized it, and thanks to everyone who sits through the ads. But I haven't looked into doing pre-roll ads or post-roll ads or sponsored content or that, and how that would work with an Antec. It's an interesting dynamic, worth exploring. I haven't explored it yet. Would you consider being available as a podcast guest for people like Lex Friedman, for example? Thanks for the question, Lionel. I'll be honest, I haven't actually watched any of Lex's interviews. I think he'd much rather prefer interviewing a Jim Keller or an Elon Musk rather than crazy potato guy journalist. What's the tastiest wafer you have eaten so far? Pink. And how does chiplet glue taste like? I could make a horse joke here. It's Intel's chiplet client 2.0 strategy. It's an interesting one. It's going to be fun. Hey, Fully Buffered. If you guys haven't subscribed to Dell Channel 21, Guido, Fully Buffered, sorry. This guy does great videos. He does videos on the tech I want to do videos on. It's kind of like, okay, you've done your video, but can I borrow the stuff to do my video on it? And I think at some point we need to do a collaboration, because I think it would go down really well. From all your own systems you've had, which has been your favorite and why? That's a tough one. I actually did see this question beforehand, and I spent way too long thinking about it, and I don't think I came up with an answer. So I have one of my first videos was a Rate My Potato video where I was talking about the names of systems, and arguably the names of systems I think is somewhat important. I mean, I've had fun systems. I've had the Acer Ferrari 1 system, which I used during my PhD, that I played games at a LAN at the low settings using the low resolution, the super ultra low resolution textures and poly models and stuff. And LAN gaming on that was fun. It was a dual-core Bobcat. I think the next laptop I had after that was a 19 by 12 Dell M4400 system with a Quadro in it. Battery life was terrible, but just the screen real estate was really, really good. Um, for all the hardware that I have to use, I don't change my main system that often. The system that I'm currently running now, it's in a Corsair 760T white. It's called Coriolis. It's a 10-core 6950X, Intel's most expensive consumer CPU. And yeah, I haven't really changed it in 4 years, aside from change graphics cards every now and again. And even then, changing the graphics cards, I took out the 1080 and put in a GTX 950 because it was just making too much noise for recording. So I still do play games like Borderlands 3 and stuff like that, but I don't necessarily care about getting those ultra high frame rates sometimes. So, Arden, I did see this question before, and I think this is a very good question. What's your best guess on how much longer x86 will be the dominant platform for desktop laptops and servers? It will dominate as long as there is performance to be had. The only real reason that x86 is still the most prevalent is because of the decades of software built on it, the decades of optimization in people's minds. And the fact that there is still performance growth generation on generation, even for Intel. So then there's still a lot of performance there. As we've seen with Tiger Lake, still got a lot to go, and AMD promising 19% IPC on Zen 3, and maybe there's some more on Zen 4. It's going to be somewhat crazy. When that peters out, when we hit that sort of like single core threshold, then I think x86 for client is going to increase. I mean, aside from use cases like the Chromebook or the smartphone, where ARM is the main dominant one there, that's really worked. I mean, if I could run all my x86 apps on an ARM system that's faster than running on an x86 system, that would be the ultimate win for ARM, right? And some might argue that that could be what certain companies are trying to aim for right now. Paul, hi again. Would you say you're at a pivotal point of your career? I love being able to see you consume your content in new ways and see you grow. Seems like you're following a Jason Snell-like path. Apologize, don't know who he is. Find someone to start Silicon Podcast with. I mentioned John. I'm at a pivotal point in my career. I don't know, to be honest. I've been doing the senior CPU stuff at Antec for 5 years, and it's kind of leveled, as in there's nowhere more up to go than an Antec senior CPU editor. If I was going to go up, I would arguably be doing less content publicly, or I'd be doing more behind the scenes, and I'd be less on stage. I mean, I've always said that if I go further in the industry, I want to be somebody whose face is out there, whose content is out there, and who's recognizable. Now, I've already mentioned that TechTechPotato is ultimately just some fun for now. Just tackling those topics that I think are interesting. So, would I say I'm at a pivotal point in my career? I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. If I follow the same path, then I'll still be in Antec, I'll still be doing TechTechPotato, I'll still be traveling 200,000 miles. I like traveling 200,000 miles. It sounds crazy. I like airports, and if you do it right, then you get the nice seats, and if you do as much as I do, then lounge access makes everything a lot easier. I also live quite near Heathrow, so I like doing that. I'd like to do more of that. I think my goal is perhaps to make sure that who I'm working with is growing. So whether that's growing in Antec, going beyond the people that we have at Antec, or whether that's growing TechTechPotato, I'm quite type A in that respect, even though, I sometimes I feel like I'm behind on all my work. Let's go back to the chat. Let's see. What's your opinion about AVX 512? AVX 512. What was it? Jim Keller said in a presentation that there are only 19 or 29 people he trusts to do vector compute properly. I mean, AVX 512, natural extension of AVX2 or AVX 256, whatever you want to call it. Good idea, but has to be implemented in the right way, I think. and it's from that perspective, I still think it's just more of a enterprise thing than a CPU thing. Putting it on your Xeons, fine. Even on your your Xeon E's, your 6 and 8 cores for the desktop type stuff. I don't I don't think it has a place in consumer. I mean, so one argument is take the take crypto algorithms, especially the SHA algorithm, SHA-1 and SHA-2. So AMD has a very dedicated hardware accelerator for this. Even VIA has a very dedicated hardware accelerator for this. Intel doesn't. Intel has just announced its SHA accelerator for AVX 512. It's so what they've done is that they've repurposed the AVX 512 unit to do SHA, which means it's fast, but it's still not as fast. I don't think it's as fast as a dedicated hardware execution engine. I don't know. I'm not as sold on AVX 512 as Intel is, and I tell Intel this all the time. I keep saying, tell me what you have that is accelerated on AVX 512 that the consumer can use. And over the 3, 4, 5 years they've had it now, they're now at 19 different use cases, of which only 10 are AVX 512 related. 6 of them is just the same software but in 2 separate occasions, and it's very dedicated software for the consumer to use it. Now HPC, great, perfect, fine, do it for that. Consumers, yeah, I'm not convinced yet still. Long Intel, I have no financial positions. I mean, I have a pension, but I'm not in control of that, so I have no financial positions. I do some consulting for Wall Street, for the investment funds. If you want to get in contact with me to go down that route and get some of my time, I go through GLG. They organize a bunch of stuff. I do 1 or 2 calls a quarter about that. So, but yeah, in that circumstance, all I'm doing is I'm explaining what I think about the industry, where I see people stand, how I'm seeing market shares trending, and where ultimately raw performance lies and how that might translate to consumer, and then interactions between AMD and Intel and ARM and its partners, and a nod to Qualcomm and everything like that. I tend to talk a lot on those, so be prepared for long discussions. Back when so Tomas Fernandez, back when they announced Zen 2, they said that Zen 3 was design complete, and now that they've announced Zen 3, they mentioned that Zen 4 was just in design. Do you think Zen 4 could take longer than usual? It could take longer than expected. It could do. AMD's cadence has been good. If their Zen 3 numbers, if they're accurate, and then we see Rocket Lake do what it does, and if AMD's still in the lead, arguably they have more room to breathe. And then also beyond that, Zen 3, there are rumors about Zen 3 Plus, and I haven't seen anything official. I'm not a big rumors guy. I'm more of a official comment guy. So if you just put that to one side, because I have no idea whether it's actually going to exist or not, I haven't been following up with it. But Zen 4, the idea on the consumer side at least is a new socket. We believe it's a new socket. We believe it's new memory. So it's they can take longer on that. And I think if it works well out of the box day one, then people will be happier than how previous AMD launches have been with BIOSes and new platforms and such. And they could also just launch it in the enterprise space first for a few months, and I think everything will still be fine there. JS, favorite piece of company expo swag. Mug, t-shirts are good. I mean, you'll notice that in some videos I'm wearing various t-shirts that I get from events. Getting multi-region plug sockets, especially as a traveler, is good. I have way too many battery packs, and there's only one good one that I've had from data, which is a battery pack and an LED light, so it helps for photos as well. Um, I mean, my discussion about swag, and I know Steve from Gamers Nexus has his opinion on this, and various other people in the industry do. It's perhaps another topic for a long video on what is swag, what does it mean to a journalist. Should you trust a journalist who accepts swag? Then there's the other thing of, well, if you decline it, are you causing an issue with certain companies, and how it reflects on the PR team, and is it just the PR team doing their job to what they've been told by the senior executives? And my main go-to bag hold all is a Radeon backpack that I got during a Polaris briefing in Macau. That was trip on the way to Computex. And I've had that bag for 4 years. It's even been stolen and recovered once. I've taken that to Intel briefings. I've taken that to ARM briefings. I've seen Charlie from Semi Accurate wear an Intel t-shirt to AMD briefings, and he likes to wear. He likes to poke the bear on that one. Fun stuff. The bigger context of swag, I think, is perhaps a good topic for a separate video, and it might be worth perhaps collaborating with a few people to do that. Ryan, thanks again for your super chat. Another $5. That's amazing. Who knew you could send money across the internet? Who do you think, if anyone, has the best chance of overtaking TSMC? The best opportunity for any company to overtake TSMC is if they get to gate-all-around FETs first. So gate, for those of you who don't know transistor terminology, transistors used to be planar, and then we got to sort of 22 nanometer, 16 nanometer, and then we made it 3D. And the next stage of making them 3D is you kind of wrap the gate around the transistor, and it's all to do with driving another function of density improvement, and then just also making that scale. The best thing about gate all around, or sometimes you'll see it as nano sheets and nanotubes, is that where your transistors. So transistors are a number of gates in a design, and with planar and with FinFETs, you have those transistors are a discrete number of gates. So you either have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or I guess in modern processes you either have 6 or 8 or 10, depending on whether you want high performance or high density. With gate-all-around and nanosheets, I keep banging this, rather than having that discrete, you have a continuous option. So it means you can tune your transistors very closely, down to the right voltage and the right response you want. When we move to gate-all-around FETs, once, say, Samsung and TSMC, and I'm not sure what Intel's plan is to this, I mean, Mike Mabry said within 5 years. So we'll see how that goes. That will give a lot of products, especially leading edge products, that very fine degree of tuning at the transistor level, which we haven't seen before. I mean, we can already tune a product for power, for performance, for frequency. It's all to do with how you arrange buffers around the system and critical paths and monitoring and such. When we get to Gafets, it's going to make it more complex in a new dimension that these chip designers are going to take advantage of. And I just realized I'm only halfway through the full live chat. Sorry, it's lots of questions. Thank you. Linus, we're all here for the potato spec. Who wants Linus when there's Ian? I've told Linus and I have an interesting relationship. Every time there's like a major event like Computex or whatever, we'll always end up bumping into each other, and every so often we'll arrange to go have a meal, and me and him and maybe Luke and maybe a couple of others, shoot the crap, and I give him insight from my side of the fence, and he gives me insight from his side of the fence, and it's all really interesting, and we'll talk about things that we said. And sometimes that comes into content and videos. It's kind of fun. at one point I would like to kind of do what like Patrick from Serve the Home did, is just end up going to Vancouver and helping lend my expertise. Yeah, I've become a big fan of Anthony over there, Anthony Young. He's doing some really nice work with Linus, and I hope he really gets a lot more screen time. Um, what you're referring to as Linux is in fact GNU Linux, or I've recently taken to be calling it GNU plus Linux. I do realize that there's lots of differentiation there. Not that I've actually spent much time researching the difference. What do you think your biggest achievement or development in the semiconductor industry? What do I think is the biggest achievement or development in the past 10 to 15 years? EUV. EUV or FinFET. I really would like to do a deep dive into ASML, the company who makes the EUV machines, and Cymer, who makes some of the optics as well. I have an open invitation to go visit their factory in Wilton, Connecticut, but I can't take that up because of the travel restrictions. But yeah, ASML is doing fine work. They have a very nice monopoly, but their big three investors are Intel, TSMC, and Samsung. So yeah, I think EUV, because I mean EUV's been talked about for decades. The fact that it's actually now working and we have a roadmap from low NA optics to high NA optics, and pushing through the 5, 3, 2, 1.4 nanometer by the end of 2020s. Yeah, I think I'd have to put EUV. Just the 5-second thought, EUV. The best story is Linus saying, "Dr. Cutress." Yes, I know he does that. He does like to tell the story of how we first met and how I was a complete dick to him, because I told him he should call me by my name. Yeah, I want to say I was joking. I was probably not. I was very young and naive. I kind of really didn't know who he is. I think he's glad that I introduced myself to him in that way, even though I'm pretty sure I was a dick, and I've apologized profusely since. Any insight into how AMD's Infinity Cache might work? Read the patent filing and white paper, but only understand so much. Please send me a link at my Anantech email address with the patent and the white paper. I don't think I've seen that. Stephen Hart. Reach out to me on Twitter if you can't find my email address. But I would like to read that very much. Maybe I'll even do a video on it. I love the recording of the interview you did with Papermaster. Any plans or other future interviews to be on YouTube? So, I mean, the interview with Papermaster, as anybody who's watched it and in the comments has read, when I do an interview like that with C-level executive, the primary goal is the written article on Anantech first. Just because the only reason why I'm getting those interviews is because of my position on Anantech. I had the bright idea about 10 minutes before that interview went live. To try and get a video. So I've got two screens here. I was trying to double OBS with one recording my camera and my audio, and one recording the screen where I think we were using Microsoft Teams maybe or something, and recording his audio, and it kind of didn't work straight away, and it was so we lost the first question. I didn't have the second, but because it was a written interview, I was typing all the time, and I have MX Blues, so everybody was picking up, and I'm sorry about that. Mark knew going into the interview it was going to be, it's a interview for written, and so people typing, if I was in face-to-face, I'd be furiously writing on a keyboard as well as he was talking. Thing is, I wasn't sure that even the audio was recording. I could see bars moving up and down, but I wasn't entirely sure, so... but if I get the opportunity again, and I get perhaps a better setup, then yes, more interviews. The thing is, with some of those interviews, because my mind is stupid, I will move around topics, and I'll come back to them, and then go away from them and come back to them again. So if you're reading or if you're watching that, it sounds like mentally I'm very absent-minded. Though when it comes to the written reviews, obviously I will do the transcription, I'll do some slight editing, just because people don't speak in sentences. If you've ever done any transcription, that's always fun. then if you then I'll also rearrange the questions so they actually make audio. So a video interview requires a bit more preparation in advance. I didn't do that with Papermaster, but it kind of worked. And I know a lot of my previous interviews wouldn't have necessarily worked unless you guys are happy with me sort of cutting questions and putting them in a nice order. Let me know if you're okay with that. Then yeah, there should be more room for video interviews. If not, I'm going to just have to plan a little bit more. Henry Abanto, not saying that it's 100% true, but why Xilinx and not Lattice Semi? I think because Xilinx has the larger market cap and is more applicable to perhaps being synergistic with AMD's portfolio. I mean, people have asked if I should do an AMD Xilinx kind of video, and actually in my last consultancy call, I was asked about it. It's a tough one to figure out. I don't see much synergy between the products anyway, unless I mean, from an Intel perspective, adding Altera, having the extra FPGA with Plus product and tying people into the ecosystem works for them because they're that such a size. I'm not sure it works necessarily for AMD unless they want something that's kind of like a co-processor to GPUs or so okay, quiz me this, people. If you could buy a GPU with a 10 gig Ethernet on it, would that be appealing? Because it would perhaps mean removal of Ethernet from motherboards and just placing it on the GPU, or Wi-Fi on the GPU. Perhaps that would be interesting. Let me know. Has AMD bought Xilinx yet? No. Did the stream crap out? Probably. Let's see. What do you think is the future for Global Foundries? Global Foundries, I actually haven't seen their financials recently, which is annoying because I was signed up to their tech day. So the reason why they pulled out of doing EUV, even though they'd already purchased 2 machines, is because their main financial investors weren't seeing any return on their investment. Global Foundries were pumping more and more money into R&D to enable 10 and 7 nanometer. I forget now. But what I do remember is they weren't happy with spending and the profits not recouping. I mean, the main investor is Mubadala, I believe, which is the big oil. Is it owned by a family in the Middle East, via royal family in the Middle East, or it's a nation state oil backed company who also have major stakes in Ferrari and AMD. So that's the reason why they pulled out, and they've got strong customers on the 22 nanometer stuff and the 16 nanometer and the 14 nanometer stuff. Even when AMD's wafer agreements go away, I think there's still a lot there for Global Foundries to do. They were meant to have like a 12 nanometer FDX platform, which is kind of like their low power SoC, but they've made it with body bias, so it's high performance. They were talking about that 3 years ago, and it's still not ready. So I don't know what's going on there. When do you see a multi-die approach happening for gaming cards? That is really difficult. The paradigm for having multi-die GPUs, I mean, we all know SLI and the issues that comes with, but the paradigm of actually getting it working akin to a proper multi-die environment is really difficult, just because of the bandwidth issue when you split things up into chiplets. Keep everything on die, fine. So if there is a time when something like an EMIB or TSMC's 3D Fabric can come even halfway close to matching on-die connectivity, bandwidth, and power. Power in this context is measured by petajoules per bit per transfer, which, because you're doing chiplet off-die, even through an EMIB or a interposer, is still a factor 10 too high. Then we'll get some way into solving that issue by it just being like a normal. With Intel's Ponte Vecchio, they're also, they've got the Rambo cache there, which I think is some way into buffering those sorts of data transfers. Maybe that's a solution. solution for HPC at least. Graphics, I don't know. People, the bar for graphics is so high that if somebody goes for a chiplet design and it doesn't scale to tens of millions of units, it might not get off the ground. So let's see. Oof, I'm speaking a lot. Stev 1212, 5900X or 3900 XT. What does your gut say? If you're buying today, 3900 XT. Sorry. What's the coolest CPU you've reviewed, Lord Sauron? Cannon Lake. Cannon Lake was really fun. I've still got the Xiaoxin somewhere. I still haven't written that review. Sorry. Yeah, Cannon Lake, Xiaoxin. I've got a couple of things that are AMD related, but not Zen 3 related, that I can't talk about yet. Because if I do talk about it, I know somebody else will talk about it and get to the review sooner than I will. Overclocked 3990X was fun. And having these sort of weird CPUs, trying to find them. Like I say, this is Carrizo desktop, one of 3 that were made. Trying to find the CPUs that were only sold in China, for example, like the I want to say the FX 6330, which I have. I still believe it's in the box that I got it in. Yeah, I think I'm gonna say Cannon Lake. So Cannon Lake was fun. What Intel did with Ice Lake and Tiger Lake with the performance previews, I actually really like those. I know some people don't like them because it's not a full, proper view of the chip as it would be in a product, but it helps us look at the microarchitecture and stuff like that. I guess also getting first gen Zen in was fun. The W3175X, that loud. Actually, so you see this box here. This still holds the Intel's auction only 14 core Core i9 9990 XE that runs all cores at 5 gigahertz. That's nice and loud. Can't run that at night, and you can't run it during the day at home. I do not have access to a server rack, so it stays in the box for now. Essex YA, man. Different end of the country, I think. Rytrap 0. Here's a speculative question. With Keller being behind AMD's K8 Athlon 64 and Zen, and now leaving Intel, do we see Jim Keller follow up to Ryzen? I don't think so. Jim, Jim's circumstance for Intel leaving. You've probably heard what everybody else thinks. I don't know if what the official reason for the actual reason for him leaving is public, but suffice to say, Jim needs some time to himself before he gets back into the game. If he's going to decide to get back into the game, the guy is a very passionate car guy, like Joe Macri. He's also a passionate windsurfer, I think. He's a surfer dude. He's also quite built. He could retire. He could go work for a startup. I think he's always said he likes working for startups. So we could see him on another AI project. I don't see him going back to AMD. I don't see him going back to Intel. I don't see him. I don't know. Jim works best at large companies if he's given the tools. Now, what big company is going to give him the tools? It's interesting one there. I once worked with somebody from Hull. He pronounced toad as turd. Yep, turd in ear. Do you expect to be able to get your hands on the new Epics once they come out? Yes, we. Anantech is one of AMD's lead media partners, one of Intel's lead media partners, one of ARM's lead media partners. We get involved in all of that, and we give them all feedback, good and bad feedback. But because we've had that long-term relationships, where if we've got something negative to say, we know the way to say it without being vindictive and facetious, which I think is perhaps a lost art of conversation. What do you think of ARM being sold to Nvidia? Not a fan. If Nvidia keep their fingers out of ARM, then it will be fine. But Nvidia doesn't have a strong history when it comes to licensing IP. Thanks to Jacques Ollers, 10K. Yep, I'll do more videos when I can, honest. Any idea of a CISC alternative to x86? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Not one that would take the market by storm. Did John? Oh, John joined. I don't know where the timestamps are. Perhaps I should turn timestamps on because I'm probably way behind. Yes, okay, I'm half an hour behind on comments. Sorry. Is Ampere going to cause data centers to overheat? No. Data centers know what they're doing. Horse duck question. I didn't see a horse duck question. Sorry, Adam. AMD's growth in data center being damped because of COVID, is that for enterprise and government? Do you mean hyperscalers as well? Hyperscalers shouldn't have been that much affected. Hyperscalers play with everything, so I think I'm good. You should probably ask you to say potato in Romanian. Okay, so my wife is Romanian, and the fact that I don't know potato in Romanian, all I know is cabbage in Russian, which I believe is kapusta. I understand the concept of silicon lottery, but not what is actually happening in a chip. How can a chip require high-low voltages to compensate tasks? Surely either works or it doesn't. It's a measure of stress and current related as you push the frequencies. Obviously, you can use a much lower voltage if you just dial back the frequency. Also, with silicon lottery, my analogy is always think of it like chocolate chip cookies. You have a packet of chocolate chip cookies. It's like 20 processors, and on the outside they're all the same processor. They're all a chocolate chip cookie, but some have more chocolate chips than others. And you can go into leaky and things. And thanks, John, answering questions. Big John, the man, the legend, or as Patrick from Serve the Home calls him, Mon Jasters. John and I were talking today about Peloton and cycling. Ian will pull in an AND and just get hired by Apple. I would struggle to think what I would do at Apple. Really. What if I was... What, he was Borat? I was Borat? I don't know. The slight hum and hiss in the audio triggers me a lot, so you should get a better sound card. So just to clarify, my setup is the really cheap, newer mic that you can get on Amazon. That's paired into a USB sound card because the audio on my motherboard is shot. That's running through Nvidia RTX Voice, which I'm having to dial up the gain in OBS. If that being said, I am in my office right now. My office is 130 square feet, if you can imagine 130 square feet. And I have about 6 systems being tested right now on benchmarks. They produce fan noise and heat. So yeah, if you see me shiny, that's because I'm sweating. And living in London and having recently bought a house, I do not have the space to have a separate audio recording area. Was trying to get part of the attic to do that, but excuse me. Apparently the pipes in the attic aren't right for boarding, so we need to get the pipe. It's been a long, convoluted process. Let's see. Oh, my stuff is going through. I can't keep up. Yeah, okay. Now I'm only 25 minutes behind. how do you see the trajectory of RISC-V versus ARM over the next decade, based on what you're seeing in the industry? Um, I think one of the issues with RISC-V, I mean, James Pryor from Sci-Fi will disagree with me on this, is at least with ARM, you get a license to use a very specific core, and that's what you go through. With RISC-V, you can either license a core from Sci-Fi or somebody else, or you can do an open source core and hope that works or verify it, or you can build your own. For a lot of those RISC-V steps, at least for the smaller companies, they might be a bit of a step too far. At least when you license a chip from ARM and you use their online system to help design an SoC, that free thing that they've got going now, then that's still, I still believe that's a value add to that product, even though you might not end up with perhaps a more ideal microcontroller type system. It'll be interesting to see how far RISC-V goes in terms of raw performance, but I still think we're a long way off, because when, to quote Papermaster in his interview, once you start going after performance, got to start spending transistors, and arguably, some of the benefits of RISC-V being smaller cores goes away. And we're starting to see some high performance RISC-V cores coming through in the academic side. So, do you ever sleep? I try. I'm not one of these people who can just get by with 4 hours a night. Every so often I will do a flat 12 hours and then feel terrible. Lord Sauron, what laptop do you use when traveling? So for ages, I used to have a Huawei MateBook 13. Then I moved to an Asus. No, sorry, a HP X360 Spectre, then went back to a newer version of the Huawei MateBook 13, then a Huawei MateBook X Pro. Huawei. It's a good design ID, and these are X review samples I'm repurposing. I actually wanted to move my travel laptop to the Zephyrus G14, the Ryzen one, but because of the pandemic, I never really got around to doing it, and I haven't really opened my laptop apart from to test it since. And then I also have the Lenovo Slim 7 Ryzen that would also be an interesting element. And if any of you see my Twitter recently, I also have a laptop with a 3950X in it for review. So, do you think AMD will end up the performance king, whereas Intel becomes bang for the buck king? Not sure. Intel's not really been bang for the buck king in a while, and they have a strong corporate identity of the high gross margins. So if that comes into conflict, one thing's going to either heads will roll at Intel in order for them to cut back, or Intel might implode on that front. It's hard to tell. What's your favorite ISA and why is it Itanium? If games start optimizing around fast storage, will 8K gaming get FPS boosts from a RAM drive? It depends on texture loading, really. I mean, you can play an 8K game with 1080p textures. I mean, to be honest, I some of the benchmarks I already run, I run in 8K mode because of super scaling, where you render on the GPU at 8K and then just downscale to 4K or 1080p. It's always funny when I see other people saying, "Oh, I'm doing benchmarks in 8K, or I'm doing or doing benchmarks in 4K, doing benchmarks in 8K." 2 years ago, I was benchmarking Civ 6 in 16K, just because there was a slight error in the initialization files. I can also run Final Fantasy 15 at 60 by 60 resolution. It's really fun. Let's see, more questions. You're really keeping me filled with questions. Thank you. I will. Oh, is Linus raiding? Oh, thanks, Linus. Yeah, I'm so far behind, I can't see it. Let's see if he's actually messaged me on Twitter. No, not yet. Linus is watching you. Thanks, Linus. This is payback for not mentioning me in one of your videos. Um, Ian, would FPGA for ray tracing be feasible? So ray tracing, was it 4 or 5 years ago? Maybe even more. I was at Mobile World Congress with Imagination Technologies, and they were showing me a small chip that was 5 watts, and it was doing 300 million rays per second ASIC. It astounded me how long it took before we got to ray tracing now, where we're dealing with 10 gigaраys per second on GPUs. Back then, Imagination kind of had it figured out. What do you mean by consultancy call? So if a investment fund with their managers, they want to invest in some tech stocks, or they are already invested in tech stocks, rather than going out and doing the research on the market, which they would spend 5, 10, 20, 50 hours, what they do is they ask experts for their time, and they put questions to the experts, based on what they know, and then it's up to the expert to either give them deeper insight into what the investment fund manager might not know, or additional context. But it all has to be public record, and if it's opinion, you have to say it's opinion, and you can't say anything that's under NDA. And you get paid for your time. And for these investment funds, for these monetary funds, it's cheaper for them to pay somebody like me or a tech analyst, for an hour's work, than it is for them to spend a week researching a company or two companies. So, I mean, it's like if you watch like Mad Money with Jim Cramer, he has an idea of what AMD does and what Intel does. But if you want to start talking, on a competitive level, or what they're doing with their customers, and you don't know that, or you're new to the market, then you call up an analyst, you call up an expert, and you pay them for their time. I mean, don't get me wrong. When you the tech analysts that you might hear of, like the Patrick Moorheads, like the Tirias researchers, these guys I meet at events, they do that stuff all the time. The Linley Group, that stuff. So by comparison, I'm small potatoes. Potatoes. Oh, more questions. I'm actually really liking these questions. Thank you. It's making me think. Thank you. Thanks, Melon Hipster. Thanks, Joseph Crossman. 128 core Threadripper in Zen 3. Doubt it. Consumer went from 16 core to 16 core. Threadrippers like to go from 64 core to 64 core just because the chiplets are the same. Let's see. Do you think Zen 2, Zen 3 will perform better with overclocks of RAM if Infinity Fabric come from TSMC instead of Global Foundries? So that I/O die, I/O die is the stuff that doesn't necessarily scale. What I would love to see is Infinity Fabric over, rather than going through a package, go through an interposer, or go through something like an EMIB, or I think TSMC calls it their CoWoS L. Yeah, and then I think Infinity Fabric would be great. Are special instructions stable under overclock? Usually, AVX2 and AVX512 obviously draw more power, so beware of those. Thanks, Max. Let's see. Kite surfer. Oh, okay. John's clarifying my earlier comment about Jim Keller. He's a kite surfer. What are you expecting from the new EPYC from Pete 2097? As good as 5000? Yeah, I mean, AMD, if all else being equal, you'd assume it is more of the same. 90% gains. We'll find out a lot more on November 5th about Zen 3. I mean, it's AMD likes to do the things. It's like, okay, here's a consumer launch. We're going to focus on the consumer-specific features, and then when it comes to the enterprise launch, there'll be some enterprise features that we weren't told about. So there'll be some of that coming through, I imagine. Apple is so big, they're making their own hardware. Would it make sense for Google to build a fab? No. Not unless they were doing something. Like no, no, no. Another AMD buying Xilinx question. Yeah, I think I might have to do a video on that. I'll bring in John. Thailand Kapusta is Kapusta in Russian. Okay. Sorry, my chat's going a bit haywire. Okay, I'm now only 10 minutes behind, I think. What do you think is the future of custom silicon based on RISC-V or other similar open ISA? RISC-V fills a hole that ARM wasn't catering to. With these questions, it's always a case of, well, where do the boundaries lie in where the ISA is applicable and where the silicon can be built to meet the demands of the markets in which the ISA is applicable. Yeah, it's in terms of open RISC-V has got the leg up. What I would like to see, I think, with RISC-V is a combination of revenues generated as a result or costs saved. With ARM, it's easy, right? Because ARM just it's the one company doing the model. You have the people that license the cores, and you have the architecture licensees, and it's pretty easy to see how much it scales. But ARM isn't necessarily that big. What's that? What's ARM revenue? Total assets 3 billion. Oh, it's all done in yen now. ARM could be worth anything from 6 billion to 40 billion. Didn't Nvidia pay 40 billion? Yeah, I don't think the revenues are high enough on ARM. ARM's everywhere, but I don't know. It's not of the scale of x86. In the Intel Q3 video, you mentioned that Intel doesn't have the architecture advantage. Would they re-implement past architectures such as Itanic or ARM? No, don't think so. That's a pretty easy no. Newegg is not shipping to my country. I don't particularly like Newegg shipping outside of the US. I once spoke to Newegg, I believe at a Mobile World Congress maybe 3 years ago, and they said, yeah, we want to expand into Europe. We've already got a site in Barcelona in Spain for a warehouse to ship to Europe, and that's where we'll be shipping all our stuff to Europe from. And then it kind of all fell apart quickly after. I'm not privy to the details of Newegg's corporate infrastructure. That's a very small office with lots of stuff. Yes. You don't have to tell me that. During the summer, it's unbearable because I don't have air conditioning either. It's just fans and yeah. Burning Tree 217. 6 systems is a lot. How much electricity do you use per month? So it's a bit weird. I think it varies between like an extra £40 to £60 a month. But you have to forget. So I have a system in front of me. Is got a Skylake Core i3 with a 2080 Ti in it. So what's that? Max power consumption of that is 450 watts. That system isn't running 450 watts all the time. It's barely running 70 watts all the time. It'll run through the CPU benchmarks and the CPU. So the CPU is firing up. CPU's a max of 65 watts. During the 24-hour CPU test run, it's only peaking at 65 watts, and it's only doing that during very specific benchmarks. Then when it comes to gaming, no gaming workload is 100% on the CPU, 100% on the GPU. So you might see peaks in the sort of 200, 250, 300. But there are pauses between the games, and I think my test suite is currently 12 games. Run 10 minutes on each settings, and there's 4 sets of settings per game. So 44 times, so 440 minutes per GPU per CPU, and yet most of that is idle. So yeah, when I say 40, £60 a month, yeah, it depends how active I've been as well. Um, so uh, turn off RTX voice to show us how good we have it. No, I promise. If you've seen some of my earliest videos, then yeah, you'll know how bad it is. Because I try to cancel it out with noise cancellation, and it just makes me sound tinny and really bad. What's this? Let's class divide. Printed pixels. Thank you for the 100 Norwegian krona. Many kudos for your work over at Nantech. Any thoughts on why more recent GPU architecture seems to shift more towards niche hardware operations relative to more general processing cores? The argument there is that you can only add more processing cores if to a certain extent before you hit reticle size. So if you have a very well-defined workload, like a matrix multiplication operation, like a ray trace, then you can put in a dedicated hardware unit which will run that operation at much lower power. It's the difference between having general purpose and ASIC. What you're essentially doing is, GPU is called an ASIC, but this is an ASIC of an ASIC. Which sounds stupid, but it's like I was saying with CPUs, with having these SHA hardware accelerators on AMD and Nvidia, but Intel's deciding to go down the AVX512 route. The AVX512 route uses a lot of power. The AMD Nvidia solution is, by contrast, a lot lower power and a lot smaller die size, but you have that fixed function is fixed for only that very specific workload. Intel don't lose the die area by having that special function unit, that special unit just for SHA instructions. So you have to have the balance of the general purpose with a fixed function, and because we're having more transistor budget as we go down to smaller nodes, then we get the ability to add in a lot more of those special function units, and that you're not going to stop that from continuing. We're going to get to see more and more special function units. The critical point as we move that way is going to be latency, bandwidth, and interconnect. And I've been saying for years that the next battleground is going to be on the interconnect, and with hindsight, I should have said interconnect and packaging, because it's both, especially on the leading edge. And we're seeing a bunch of these AI companies play with new packaging technologies, and you've got crazy people like Cerberus. Okay, answer to my question: what's the weirdest CPU? What's the most interesting CPU you've ever reviewed? If I get a chance to play with a Cerberus, Cerebrus. It's 2 a.m. Cerebrus wafer scale, then I think that will be Cannon Lake for sure. But again, thanks Printed Pixels. Yeah, money over the internet. Who would have thought? Let's see. A lot of you talking amongst yourselves. Thank you. Why is HBM2 not being used on GPUs anymore? It is expensive. It involves more advanced packaging, which again adds to the cost, which means you can only do it in volume. And because it's cost, it means it has to be on your highest performing part. And if your highest performing part isn't market leading, you're not going to sell enough. Plus also, GDDR6X is now using PAM4 signaling. So bandwidth is still going up. I think companies are identifying that for consumers, the regular GDDR memory is fine, and then for the enterprise, where you have sparse matrix calculation, that's where you need the HBM. I think we also had hybrid memory cube from Micron for a while, so again, this is, let's see. Thanks, Jeremy, on the 10K. It's still crazy. Peter Jansen, at least the Netherlands plays a big role in technology too with ASML. Yeah. So, question about ASML. People people say, well, why does the US have so much control over ASML selling its stuff to TSMC and SMIC in China? One of ASML's biggest factories is based in Wilton, Connecticut. I mentioned it earlier. This is the one that I want to go visit. Also, Cymer, one of the subsidiaries for the optics, is a US-based subsidiary. So it's all swings and roundabouts. Do you end up working US hours? I try not to unless there's an event, or I decide that I want to spend more time on TechTechPotato, or I've got a late night review. Despite being 35 years old now, I'd still pull the old all-nighter. Invaders die. Do you think market segmentation of products slow down development of new tech? It slows down the adoption of new computing paradigms. AVX 512 being an example, ECC. Some segmentations, make sense for price and yield. So, yeah, it's an interesting open-ended question, that one. Any news thoughts on flash graphene making any progress for new tech batteries? So part of my chemistry degree was in solid state batteries. Part of my final year projects there. Batteries is this weird area where there haven't been any significant major advancements since the late 80s. I mean, it's the key metrics are cyclability, energy density, and weight density. And the thing is, you have to get all three, and lithium ion is obviously really good. There was 5-7 years ago, they were talking about an aluminium battery that survives bending and does well, but unfortunately it has only half the energy density. And I think the cyclability was also a factor 5 worse. You can get amazing, I think lithium sulfur batteries, except they work at 300 degrees Celsius. Yeah, it's very hard to find a technology which works in all factors. It's like room temperature semiconductors. So the ability, if we find a semiconductor that works at room temperature, then it's going to be amazing for the world of industry, for the world of energy. But I think the lowest we can go down is, I want to say, 150 Kelvin, maybe 190 Kelvin. I haven't kept up to date in that area much, but there was some science news recently that they have found a room temperature semiconductor, except superconductor, but it only requires 2 million atmospheres pressure and pressed between two diamonds. It has to work in all aspects. This is part of the problem. Would a quad-channel DDR3 APU be weirder than Cannon Lake? I think Quickertech knows more than he's letting on. Do I know you in real life, or are you spying on me? Are you excited for Compute Express Link? Proof is in the pudding. So CXL, it's going to be built on the PCI. Was it a superset of PCIe standard? Either way, you can't have CXL unless you also support PCIe, at least in the first couple of revisions. So I think it's going to be confusing for consumers if they introduce it in a consumer space. In the enterprise space, they'll deal with it. How much would you pay to taste a quantum wafer? Aren't quantum qubits built on like 2245 nanometer? Do you think homegrown chips from Russia and China will be competitive to Intel, AMD? No. Ask again in 10 years. I did do a video on the Elbrus processor, that E2K thing. I haven't bothered to try to get one in. Apparently it's quite hard. if Microsoft was to buy or switch to a different ARM processor designer for desktop, who would it be from so they do not use Qualcomm? So the Windows and ARM thing is a bit of a weird mix because, I mean, a lot of people call it Windows and ARM. If you speak to Qualcomm, it's always Windows on Snapdragon. And the reason why they say this is because they've worked very closely with Microsoft to get it to work. But also they're using the element of Snapdragon acceleration to get it to work. That's why it's Windows on Snapdragon. I've asked people like Huawei and MediaTek, what about Windows on ARM for your chips? Huawei was pretty blunt actually. They turned around and said, if there's ever a market for it, then we'll go for it, and they don't see a market. We're seeing some slow adoption. My issue with the Windows on Snapdragon, at least the Microsoft side of the system, is they're gearing it towards commercial, and professionals, which I think is a really good idea. Unfortunately, some of the key software that professionals use doesn't work. So Dropbox doesn't work properly, for example. OneDrive does, Google Drive does, but the corporate version of Google Drive is called Drive File Stream, and that doesn't work because, for whatever reason. Now, I use Drive File Stream as my main, AnandTech work storage system, and I use Dropbox as my, kind of main everything else. So the fact that those don't work, and they're the ones that have my files, is really grating. I mean, I can work around, Word and Excel and browsers and things like that, but it's just one of the main barriers to entry for those Windows on Snapdragon systems is, can I replicate my workflow on an ARM-based system? And for most Office applications, the answer is usually yes, especially if they're web-based. For people that are doing specialist work, or not that direct Office work, then it depends on the software, whether it's been recompiled for ARM, or whether it's 32-bit, and we're still waiting on the full 64-bit translation layer, and whether that's fast enough, we'll see. But yeah, I actually enjoy the fact that Qualcomm's going down this route. There's a lot of chutzpah in there going down that route, and they're executing on it. I don't think their OEM partners are necessarily as convinced as they are, and yeah, there still needs work. But I'm glad somebody's doing it because it's something different and it's fun. Tachyon is all talk so far. I've had a couple of briefings with Rado, who runs Tachyon. He's a crazy dude. Lord Swaggerty, thanks for the $4.99. Do you honestly see Intel making a comeback? ARM is chipping at them from one side and AMD from another. Next 5 years seems really bad for them. If Intel get into a situation where revenues are decreasing, Intel is going to have to decide whether they're going to have to reduce R&D or reduce investment, in order to keep the shareholders happy, as bad as that sounds. Even if they didn't want to keep the shareholders happy and they told the shareholders to go away, trying to maintain that level so they have a continuous income of cash flow and they don't burn out, will depend on the executive leadership. And an engineer would do it one way, a financial guy might do it another way. So there are questions as to what people like Bob Swan and George Davis would do in that situation, and I don't pretend to speak for them. I really hope that they would be able to understand where they can refocus efforts if they need to. The thing that stuck out in my throat after the Intel financial call is the fact that they said, we can port our cores to TSMC, and then if we need to, we can port them back. That's not how that works. That really isn't. If they had an engineer on that call, they would be able to tell you. And I think it's disconcerting that they would say something like that. And it just belies perhaps a level of understanding they don't have exactly on how the process works. So we'll see. I mean, this is all predicated on the fact that if Intel loses revenue to the point where it's critical, Intel's a smart company. They have lots of smart salespeople, especially. So there will be customers and clients that have multi-year contracts and support contracts, either in enterprise, commercial, embedded, and all the other different subcompartments that Intel plays in. So even if they weren't the best option on the market, those contracts would necessarily tie in those partners. And the phrase, you never lost your job buying Xeon, for a number of those companies also still holds true. It might take a generation for it to be more amenable. I mean, phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, that still applies here. A lot of people still have that attitude. A lot of people are still happy to go with the flow, even if it means, say skipping Cascade or skipping Cooper or skipping Ice or skipping Sapphire, or just having to go on a slower cadence just because their contract partner is having trouble. Some companies are happy with that. Others aren't. The ones that are more agile, especially startups or cloud companies who just have the clout to come in and just hit it all with a hammer. They won't worry so much. But yeah, Intel's financial situation will be interesting on that. Yeah, and a lot of people have a lot of negative opinions. I think I read somewhere, I think I read on Twitter actually, Tai Kim, who writes for Barron's, he said of the financial analysts who were asking questions at the end of that call, 5 of them had rated Intel stock as a buy stock. Again, I'm not a financial guy. I would love to. Okay, here's a proposal. Here's a proposal for 2:15. I would love to spend a week shadowing one of the financial analysts, especially Stacy Raskin from Bernstein, who's quite high profile, and I've spoken to him a lot of times and met him once, and he's a really nice guy. I would love to shadow him for a week just to see what his life is like, what goes through his mind, and perhaps build some content around that to kind of understand how that side of the ecosystem, how that side of the business works, and the markets, especially for us who perhaps don't necessarily have the financial and the accounting background. Interesting fact, chemists who don't go into chemistry usually go into accounting. So yeah, I would love to do that kind of spend a week with Stacy. I bet he would love that. Stacy travels a lot as well. Let's see, more questions. Though we are coming up to close to 2 hours, I am very aware of that. Any contacts at IBM? Yes. Anything interesting they're doing at the moment? My one regret from Hot Chips this year was not spending more time on Power and Z. One big thing that IBM's Z architecture is just crazy anyway. I would love to get hold of those chips. And if you've ever seen some of the stuff that IBM used to do, I think was it Steve at EEV blog? I'm blanking on his first name. He recently did a unboxing of a really, really old HP. IBM processor, and that was just amazing. I literally want to call him up and say, can I just have that to put in the background of my video? But IBM, the OpenCAPI memory interface, what they're doing on that is really interesting because it's basically a SerDes link that you can convert into memory or storage or additional connectivity. Dave Jones, there we go. Sorry, yeah, Dave on the EEV blog. That's so. But IBM OpenCAPI memory interface. Unfortunately, it won't go anywhere outside of IBM. But if say Intel produced a server CPU that instead of memory controllers, it had an OMI interface that could either take HBM, DDR, GDDR, or it could be used for CPU to CPU links. Or it could be used for additional storage, or it could be used for, extending out. I think the latest power CPUs can do crazy amounts of terabytes of memory. So yeah, I would love to do that. Um, I would love if OMI was more in the industry. Um, but yeah, definitely look at OMI if you're interested. I think a retired engineer on Twitter is also really interested in OMI. Um, Jagadaleo, any murmurs on Big Little from AMD? No. AMD is committed to x86, and they don't have a little core um, anymore. The so just to clarify, one thing. So Big Little is technically a proprietary term for an ARM system with two types of cores prior to ARM v8.2. After that, it became dynamic, and also and dynamic allows groups as small as one core to be used, and then for everything that's not ARM, it's just heterogeneous processing. Do you have any tentative dates on an Epic release? I'm hoping Milan is by end of year, though whether we see that or not, I'm not sure. Or Octura CDNA, no, I don't have any insights. What's your thoughts on the future of open power? To be honest, I haven't actually dealt much into open power just as a widespread, how widespread it is and how prolific it is. I mean, IBM's backing it, so obviously there's a lot there. And I've seen Wendell with the Talos system. I think I tried to get one once for us to test, but that didn't work out. So yeah, I'm not sure on that. Do you use Linux? No, but I do use Windows Subsystem for Linux for some of my benchmarks, and it's all automated, so I don't have to deal with it anymore. Did anything come of the Samsung licensing from RTG? Nothing official as yet. AMD has still been presenting that we will see AMD GPUs in mobile products. Timeline for that? No idea. How it's going? No idea. I did see a guess of 2022 or 2023, but I have no idea. Do you think a Big Little will be annoying and underutilized as compared with hyperthreading? Yes. The problem is operating systems, especially Windows, loves a homogeneous CPU. And as we've seen with Lakefield, as we've seen with Windows on Snapdragon, one of the problems that Android had with Big Little is the schedulers and doing energy aware schedulers and all the different sorts of governors and that. Windows hasn't gone through that properly, so yes, it will be a problem. Scriptex, do you know more about AMD embedded stuff? Would you like to see an AMD embedded mini PC? Ta! This is the Udo Bolt. This has Ryzen embedded V1605B, I think. It's a 15-watt CPU running in 12-watt mode. Quad-core Zen Plus. It's Great Horned Owl. This unit also has inbuilt Arduino. I've done kind of CPU testing on it. I'm going to send it to somebody else to see if he can play around with the Arduino, and hopefully I'll get a review out this year, hopefully. But I've had this for a while. It's expensive for what it is, but it's just an interesting element. With AMD's embedded side, the first gen Zen embedded stuff and the Zen Plus embedded stuff is only now starting to go out into stuff like this and NUC type and logic supply and stuff like that. So I don't know when we'll see Zen 2 embedded or Zen 3 embedded. This sorts of stuff. AMD had the R series embedded CPUs, and they're designed for 7 to 15 to 20 year life cycle type stuff. And if you ever go to Vegas, pretty much all the slot machines run on AMD. They don't tell you that. Burning Tree 217. Do you have any plans to benchmark Apple Silicon? At Anantech, we already do. If you're talking about Apple in laptops, then yes, of course. I leave most of that to Andre, though. He's the ARM guy. He also does a lot of our x86 micro benchmarks. So kudos to Andre. Rich M, if you had to pick a company to work for in tech, who would you pick and why? I don't know. That's a hard one. I said earlier in this stream that if I wanted to work for a company, I'd still want to be on the leading edge. I'd want to be, public facing. Where I am now, I get to see a bit of every single company and speak to a lot of companies. If I was to move to a company in the industry, I'd obviously be limited to that one company. So it'd be interesting to see what my options would be there. I think what I want to do is go deep in the technical side and perhaps develop some homebrew first-party content for those people. Providing a stepway for you guys to understand some of the stuff and understand that these companies aren't black boxes, but they are actually full of passionate people. I really want to do an interview series with some of the people behind the scenes that we don't normally hear of. Particularly highlighting those workers that are perhaps in minorities for where they are. So we'll see it. Well, that's been rattling around in my mind for a while. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts if those sorts of interviews with, the non-standard names would be interesting. I don't know. Could I work for an investment firm or an analyst firm? Maybe. I know. Also, I like kind of setting my own schedule, and Anantech allows me to be somewhat flexible. It's I did think some people have suggested, how about Nuvia? Nuvia is developing the next best thing, and I think that's also really interesting. And they've got a good team of people over there. Though I'm not. Yeah, it's. I guess I could argue where I'd fit in. One might argue that they wouldn't need somebody like me for a little while. I don't know. And then obviously, how much would they pay me? That's always the option. So Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Fold, too expensive niche to have a preview video. We didn't get an X1 Fold, plain and simple. How's the laptop scene going to change after Apple makes their own silicon? Not a lot, I don't think. If you're already on Apple, then Apple. I don't think there's going to be much of a leap over into x86 unless there's a very significant move of people using that software. Then I don't see it encroaching that much. Hi Ben Adams, love you too, buddy. Odin, you mentioned your degree PhD is in chemistry. How did you get into tech reporting? So this is again another sort of video I want to do, but it'll be more a lot of a personal. Here's my background video. When I was doing my undergraduate, I got involved into overclocking and joined the UK team. There was only one UK team at the time, and then moved that through into my PhD. I didn't necessarily get into the extreme overclocking. I was still on air and water, but I was a sort of person who would find the best drivers or tear apart a benchmark to try and find the best operating system and way to run it. And then through that, I went to a Gigabyte Go OC event where I met with some of the other UK team members for the first time, one of which was Anantech's senior motherboard editor at the time, Rajinder Gill. I almost said Raj Kaduri then. Rajinder Gill. And we'd spoken on the forum a lot, and he'd seen some of my work there, some of my analysis of different drivers, and he saw my testing methodology, and he said, come write for Anantech. I'll be honest, at the time I didn't know who Anantech was. I wasn't necessarily into the tech journalism, reading about tech scene in that way, because I was too busy focused on my degree most of the time. So I did a couple of items for then. Um, he left abruptly at the end of 2010, I think. And an analyst turned around and said, "Well, do you want to be senior motherboard editor?" And I said, "Okay." Um, and I ended up doing that for 4 or 5 years. Um, yeah, I mean, it's topic for a longer video, but basically it was just a hobby, and I just met the right people. Um, there's if you if you really want to get into tech journalism, the best thing you can do is write, even if it or video, um, even if it's for your own blog. There are plenty of places that will take your work for free. Um, though to be honest, if they're taking your work, they should pay you for it. I'm a big advocate for paying people what they're worth and paying people for their work. At some point, I need to go and get do proper logos and intros for this channel, and I will want to pay people for their work. Um, and it's every so often I'll get an email on my Nantech email from a young person in college who's reaching out and saying, "Hey, do you have any tips on how to become a tech writer? What should I do?" And if you write for yourself, that's better than doing nothing. If you can write for an established entity, that can arguably be better for yourself. Make sure that you're the one that's commented, you're the one that's quoted on the byline, and links back to you and sort of stuff like that. But yeah, it's don't go into it thinking it's going to be a career. Very few people in tech journalism are paid well. I'm lucky enough to think that I'm one of those. But you'll see with tech journalism, at least traditional tech journalism, that there are two bands of people. There are the young sort of under 25 crowd who do it in their spare time for a bit of fun, and here's where you see some of the most extremely smart people who then end up going working for Google and Apple anyway. And then you also see the over 40s who are usually the editor-in-chiefs of their own website, or the head of their channel, and they're in it for the long haul. You see almost nobody in that sort of 25 to 40 range, because nobody in that 25 to 40 range has a spare time to do it as a freelancer, or can donate enough time to do it as a full-time job, unless they are already full-time, like I am, at age 35, or they're happy being paid arguably less than if they were an engineer. And then you also have different sorts of publishers. You have what is arguably the traditional tech press, like Anantech, like PC Perspective, hard OCP, hot hardware, those sorts of tech journalists. They're sort of more traditional. Then the YouTube route is very different entirely, because you have to have your niche, and I'm still learning it, so it's interesting and fun. Where was I? Actual engineer interviews, yes, okay, good to know. Um, any interesting tidbits about CMOS sensors? No. With accelerated GPU taking over HPC computing, do you see reduced appetite for pure CPU throughput? No. Most AI training is still done on CPUs. I think that's the biggest plus you can have for that. Mike Clark, Sam Nafziger, Skylar Saylor. That name doesn't ring a bell. Mike Clark. Mike's a great guy. I think I'd struggle to think of questions that wouldn't be too PR-y. Sam, yeah, I've spoken with Sam many times. It's my favorite moment speaking to Sam is when I get him to laugh. Um, are there any university course books or literature you'd recommend for studying semiconductor engineering and architecture? No, because I've never studied semiconductor engineering and architecture from a coursebook or a literary standpoint. A lot of what I know is through inference. Are you wearing pants right now? Yes, I'm actually wearing proper trousers. I'm a corduroy guy. Sorry, I like my corduroy. Has the personal privacy been okay since doing YouTube more? Has been more or less business as usual? Business as usual. They say that as a channel gets bigger, there's usually a few more odd crazies. I don't necessarily know. I mean, there are a few odd crazies on Twitter, but they're usually blocked or muted. You never gave us a write-up on accurate wafer prices. I know. It's on my to-do list. I have some more numbers. A very senior source at a top company gave me some intermediate numbers that I needed to fill in the gaps. I am several weeks, if not months, behind my writing. Sorry about that. Why do you, Wendell, and Linus have to stream at the same time? Friday night, I guess. And actually, with that, I think I should call it a night. That's 2 hours and 6 minutes, and it's 2:35 a.m. Hats off to all of you. Thank you for subscribing, and thanks to everyone who's stayed with me through this whole stream. Super chats. You're all amazing. Hats off to you. Let me know what you think. What's your minimum specification? I don't know how I thought of that when I recorded that segment. But thanks, everybody. Thank you all. Take care. Good night. Go watch Wendell. Let's go dive bomb Wendell's video now. Linus dive bomb me. Let's go dive bomb Wendell.